We were all at our breaking point. Maria's daughter was having panic attacks. James's son refused to go to school. Another mother, Patricia, had started sending her kid with no money at all, packing just crackers for lunch to avoid the thefts. We knew we needed something dramatic, something that couldn't be ignored or covered up. That's when Patricia mentioned her nephew worked in IT at the school district. He had access to the security systems, including classroom cameras that were supposedly broken in Brennan's room. They weren't broken. Brennan had simply told administration they were, and no one had checked. Patricia's nephew couldn't give us the footage directly, but he could ensure the cameras were working for one specific day. We planned carefully. Each parent would send their child with marked bills, not just regular money, but bills with specific serial numbers we had recorded. We would photograph the money before school and document exactly where kids put it. Then we would wait. The day came. 7 kids with marked money, all in Brennan's homeroom, all documented. I kissed Tommy goodbye that morning, promising him this would be over soon. He looked at me with eyes too old for his age and nodded. I watched Tommy walk into school that morning, his shoulders hunched like he was carrying the weight of the world. The marked $20 bill was tucked deep in his front pocket, safety pinned to the inside. We'd taken photos from every angle, documenting the serial number, the pin, everything. By 10:30, my phone buzzed. Maria's text made my heart sink. Her daughter's money was already gone. The safety pin had been cut clean through. 10 minutes later, James reported the same thing. Then Patricia. One by one, our carefully marked bills vanished during Brennan's mandatory desk organization time, where students had to step into the hallway while he inspected their workspace for cleanliness. But something went wrong with the cameras. Patricia's nephew called her in a panic. The system had mysteriously gone offline that morning. A technical glitch, according to the IT department. No footage existed of Brennan's room during the crucial time period. I sat in my car outside the school, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. We'd been so careful, so sure this would work. But Brennan was always one step ahead. That afternoon, I picked up Tommy early for a dentist appointment. He climbed into the car with red-rimmed eyes. The $20 was gone, just like we'd expected. But worse, Brennan had pulled him aside afterward. He told Tommy that he was concerned about his escalating behavior and would be recommending him for the district's special behavioral program, a program that would put a permanent mark on his academic record. I drove straight to Maria's apartment. The other parents were already there, defeat written on their faces. We'd failed. Again. Patricia's nephew had been written up for unauthorized access to school systems and was facing suspension from his job. Someone had tipped off his supervisor about his willingness to help us. James slammed his fist on the table, making everyone jump. His son had come home with a black eye. Some kids had cornered him at recess, calling his dad a liar and a troublemaker. The playground monitor had been conveniently looking the other way. We sat in silence, each of us wrestling with the same terrible thought. Maybe we should just give up, transfer our kids, move away, let Brennan win. But then Maria's daughter walked in from school. She was clutching a crumpled piece of paper. Another kid had slipped it to her at lunch. It was a note from a student in Brennan's class from 3 years ago. The family had moved away, but the kid wanted us to know we weren't crazy. The same thing had happened to them. They'd tried to fight it. They'd lost. The note included something else. A name. Mrs. Chen, a retired teacher who'd worked with Brennan before he'd married the superintendent's daughter. She might talk to us. I found Mrs. Chen at the community garden the next morning. She was a small woman with careful eyes who studied me for a long moment before inviting me to sit on a bench between the tomato plants. She listened to my story without interrupting, her face growing more troubled with each detail. When I finished, she stared at her hands for a long moment. Then she told me about Brennan's first year teaching, how he'd started small, $1 here, $5 there, always from the kids whose parents worked multiple jobs, always the ones who couldn't afford to make waves. She tried to report it once. The next day, her contract wasn't renewed. Budget cuts, they'd said, but she gave me something valuable, a pattern. Brennan always escalated near the end of the school year. He'd push harder, take more, because he knew families would rather endure a few more weeks than fight a losing battle. And he always picked one family to make an example of, to show the others what happened when you pushed back. This year, that family was mine. I thanked Mrs. Chen and drove home with my mind racing. We had 2 weeks until school ended, 2 weeks to find a way to stop this. But Brennan was already moving against us. The next day, I got a call from my manager at the diner. Someone had phoned in a complaint about me, said I'd been rude, that I'd messed up their order. My manager knew it was false, but corporate required him to document it. A few more complaints and I'd be on probation. Tommy came home that afternoon with his backpack torn. Someone had grabbed it in the hallway, ripping the strap clean off. When he'd tried to tell a teacher, she'd brushed him off. Kids will be kids, she'd said. But Tommy had seen her exchange a look with Brennan afterward. Our parent group met again that night, this time at James's house. Everyone had a story. Maria had been randomly selected for an audit at her cleaning job. Patricia's landlord had received an anonymous complaint about noise from her apartment. James's supervisor at the hospital had suddenly started questioning his time cards. Brennan wasn't just protecting himself, he was actively destroying us. We were about to give up when Patricia's daughter spoke up. She'd been sitting quietly in the corner, supposedly doing homework, but she'd been on her phone, scrolling through social media. She showed us her screen, a TikTok video from a kid at another school. He was talking about a teacher who'd stolen from him. The comments were full of similar stories, kids from all over sharing their experiences. None of them mentioned names or schools. They were too scared, but the pattern was there. This wasn't just happening in our district, it was everywhere, and people were starting to talk about it. That gave me an idea. We couldn't fight Brennan through official channels. He had too much protection, but we could tell our story. Not to reporters or school boards, but to the people who might actually listen. Other parents, other kids, the ones who were going through the same thing but felt alone. I stayed up all night writing. Not an accusation or a rant, but our story. How it started, how it escalated, how we tried to get help. I changed names, left out identifying details, but kept the truth of what was happening. The systematic targeting, the gaslighting, the way poverty was used as a weapon against us. I posted it on a parenting forum the next morning. Within an hour, it had 50 comments. Parents sharing similar experiences. Teachers admitting they'd seen colleagues do this but hadn't known how to stop it. By lunch, it had been shared to other forums. Someone cross-posted it to Reddit. The stories kept pouring in, but I'd made a mistake. I'd mentioned the Tesla, the designer clothes, the casino trips, details that were too specific. By afternoon, someone had figured out what school we were talking about. Brennan's name started appearing in the comments. My phone rang during my shift. It was the principal. He was furious. How dare I spread lies about one of their best teachers? He threatened lawsuits, restraining orders, immediate expulsion for Tommy. I hung up on him and immediately called the other parents. We needed to meet now, but when I got to Maria's apartment, she was crying. Her daughter hadn't come home from school. She'd called the office. They said she'd been picked up by her father, Maria's ex-husband, the one who'd lost custody 3 years ago, the one who wasn't supposed to know where they lived. Someone had called him, told him where to find his daughter, given him the school schedule. Maria was frantically calling the police while her hands shook. The rest of us sat in stunned silence. This had gone too far, way too far. While we waited for news about Maria's daughter, my phone buzzed with notifications. The forum post had exploded. Thousands of shares, hundreds of stories, but also threats, messages calling me a liar, comments saying I deserved what was happening. Someone had found my Facebook profile and posted my work schedule at the diner. James grabbed my phone and started deleting everything he could, but it was too late. The internet had taken our story and run with it. Some people believed us, others thought we were grifters trying to destroy an innocent teacher. The truth was getting lost in the noise. Maria's daughter was found an hour later. Her ex had taken her for ice cream and dropped her back at school, confused about why he'd been called. He had no idea who'd contacted him. The police couldn't do anything since technically no crime had been committed, but the message was clear. Brennan could reach our children whenever he wanted. I pulled Tommy out of school the next day, told them he was sick. He sat at the diner with me, doing homework in a corner booth while I served coffee and tried not to panic. The other parents did the same. Empty desks in Brennan's classroom. Brennan somehow disabled security cameras, intercepted marked bills through safety pins, and got an IT helper suspended. offended. This guy's running a more sophisticated operation than most bank heists I've seen in movies. A silent protest that nobody would acknowledge, but Brennan wasn't done. That afternoon, a social worker showed up at the diner. Someone had reported that I was keeping my child out of school without cause, that I was denying him education. She was kind but firm. Tommy needed to be in school tomorrow or she'd have to open an investigation. I wanted to scream, to explain everything, but I could see it in her eyes. She'd already been briefed. Another unstable parent making excuses for their troubled child. Nothing I said would change her mind. That night, I sat with Tommy at our kitchen table. We had 7 days of school left. 7 days of hell. I told him he could stay strong for one more week, that we'd figure something out over the summer. Maybe I could get a second job, save enough to move, start fresh somewhere new. But Tommy shook his head. He pulled out his phone and showed me something. A video he'd recorded at school. Kids in the hallway, whispering about the forum post, about Brennan, about how their money had gone missing too, but their parents hadn't believed them, or hadn't cared, or had been too scared to say anything. The video was shaky, recorded in secret, but the voices were clear. Kid after kid sharing their story. Not just from Brennan's current class, but from previous years. A hidden epidemic that everyone knew about but nobody discussed. Tommy looked at me with those two old eyes. He wanted to post it, to add to the conversation online, to show that it wasn't just angry parents making accusations, that the kids knew the truth too. I thought about Maria's daughter, about the social worker, about all the ways this could go wrong. But I also thought about Mrs. Chen, forced into retirement for speaking up, about all the families who'd moved away rather than fight, about the kids who'd learned that adults could steal from them and face no consequences. We uploaded the video together. Tommy's hands were steady as he typed a caption. No accusations, no names, just kids know more than adults think. We see everything. We remember everything, and we're not staying quiet anymore. Within minutes, his phone was buzzing with notifications. Other kids from school had found it. They were sharing their own stories in the comments, creating their own videos. A grassroots movement of 12-year-olds who were tired of being called liars. The next morning, I sent Tommy to school with no money, nothing to steal. But he walked in with his head high for the first time in weeks. He wasn't alone anymore. Half his class had seen the videos. They knew the truth, and they were watching Brennan with new eyes. I went to work expecting the worst, more complaints, maybe termination. But instead, my manager pulled me aside. His daughter went to Tommy's school. She'd had money go missing too. He'd thought she was being careless. Now he wasn't so sure. He told me my job was safe, that he'd handle any suspicious complaints personally. Throughout my shift, I kept checking my phone. The videos were spreading. Not viral, but steady. Parents were starting to ask questions. Teachers were paying attention. The narrative was shifting. It wasn't about one angry mom anymore. It was about a pattern, a system, a problem that needed solving. But Brennan was adapting too. When I picked up Tommy that afternoon, he told me about the new rules. No phones allowed in class. Random backpack searches for contraband. Anyone caught recording would face immediate suspension. The walls were closing in. That evening, our parent group met one last time. We were exhausted, scared, but also strangely hopeful. The conversation had started. People were listening. Maybe not the officials, not the people with power, but the community. The parents who'd been too afraid to speak up. The kids who'd been silenced for too long. We made a plan for the last week of school. We'd document everything. Every interaction, every incident, every small abuse of power. Not for the authorities who'd already failed us, but for the court of public opinion. For the parents who needed to know what was happening. For the kids who deserved better. Patricia's nephew, despite his work troubles, had given us one last gift. A list of every family whose child had been in Brennan's homeroom over the past 5 years. Contact information he'd pulled before losing his access. We divided up the names. We'd reach out quietly, share our story, see if others would share theirs. The response was overwhelming. Family after family with the same experience. Money missing, kids blamed, parents dismissed. Most had stayed quiet, moved on, tried to forget, but they remembered, and they were angry. By Thursday, we had statements from 37 families. Not official complaints, just parents telling their truth. We compiled them into a single document. No editorializing, no accusations. Just story after story of the same pattern, the same targeting, the same protection from above. I spent Friday morning formatting everything, making it readable, accessible, something that could be shared and understood. Tommy helped, his 12-year-old tech skills far surpassing mine. Together, we created something powerful. Not proof in a legal sense, but truth in a human one. As I drove Tommy to school for the last day before the weekend, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. We might not win in the traditional sense. Brennan might keep his job, the system might protect him, but the community knew, the parents knew, the kids knew, and knowledge was its own kind of power. Tommy grabbed his backpack, that broken strap held together with duct tape. He turned to me before getting out of the car. His smile was small but real. Whatever happened next, we'd fought back. We'd refused to be silenced. We'd found others like us and stood together. The weekend stretched ahead. 2 days to finalize our document, to prepare for whatever came next, to steel ourselves for the last week of school, the final push in a battle we'd never asked for but couldn't walk away from. I watched Tommy disappear into the building, my phone already buzzing with messages from other parents, stories still pouring in, connections being made, a network of families who'd been isolated in their struggles now finding strength in numbers. Monday morning arrived with an ominous email from the school. Tommy was being placed on a behavioral contract. Any infractions, no matter how minor, would result in immediate expulsion. The contract required my signature before he could return to class. I drove to the school with the document our parent group had compiled tucked in my bag. 37 families, years of theft, all documented, but I knew better than to show it to the principal. Not yet. Brennan was waiting in the office when I arrived, that satisfied smile playing at his lips. He watched as I signed the contract, my hand steady despite the rage burning in my chest. Tommy sat beside me, shoulders hunched, accepting his fate with the resignation of someone who'd learned the world wasn't fair. But something had shifted over the weekend. The videos Tommy and other kids had posted were creating ripples. Parents who'd never spoken up before were starting to ask questions. Teachers who'd looked the other way were beginning to pay attention. That afternoon, Brennan made his next move. Tommy's desk was searched in front of the entire class. Brennan pulled out a calculator that belonged to another student, holding it up like evidence in a courtroom. The other kids watched in silence, but I heard later from Maria that several of them had recorded it on their phones, hidden under desks and in backpacks. Tuesday brought more escalation. Brennan announced a new policy for his homeroom. All students would need to empty their pockets at the beginning of class, for safety reasons, he claimed, to prevent theft. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but the kids were learning too. They started carrying decoy wallets with fake money. They coordinated bathroom breaks so someone was always watching the classroom. They developed a system of hand signals to warn each other when Brennan was approaching their desks. Patricia's daughter created a shared document where kids could report missing money in real time. Within hours, it had dozens of entries, not just from Brennan's current students, but from kids who'd had him in previous years. The pattern was undeniable. Wednesday morning, I got a text from James. His son had found something in the school's online gradebook. Every student who'd reported missing money had received lower grades in Brennan's class. Every family who'd complained had seen their children's marks drop. It was subtle, but systematic. I spent my lunch break at the diner creating a visual timeline. Dates of theft, amounts taken, grade changes, behavioral reports. When laid out chronologically, it painted a clear picture of retaliation and control. That evening, our parent group made a decision. We wouldn't wait for the last day of school. We wouldn't let Brennan continue his psychological torture for 3 more days. We would act now. I stayed up all night preparing. Not angry rants or accusations, but a simple presentation of facts, screenshots of the kids' videos, the timeline of thefts and grade changes, testimonies from 37 families, Mrs. Chen's statement about Brennan's history. Thursday morning, I uploaded everything to a simple website. Nothing fancy, just the truth, laid out clearly for anyone who wanted to see it. I shared the link in the school's parent Facebook group with a simple message about concerns regarding classroom management and student property. The response was immediate. Parents who'd been silent started sharing their own experiences. Teachers from other schools chimed in with similar stories. The post was shared and reshared, not because it was sensational, but because it was familiar, because it resonated with something many had experienced but never named. By noon, the school's phone lines were jammed, not with reporters or media, but with parents. Tommy's turning middle school into a spy movie with decoy wallets and hand signals while parents build spreadsheets like they're preparing for the world's most boring revolution. Who knew fighting injustice required this much Excel? Angry parents, concerned parents, parents who wanted answers about why their children's lunch money had been disappearing, parents who suddenly understood why their kids had been coming home hungry. Brennan tried to maintain control. He held an impromptu assembly for his homeroom, lecturing about the dangers of spreading false information online. But the kids weren't buying it anymore. They sat in stony silence, some discreetly recording his increasingly frantic warnings. The principal called me that afternoon, his tone very different from our previous conversations. He wanted to meet, to discuss the situation, to find a resolution. I agreed, but only if the other parents could attend, all of them. Friday morning, the school parking lot was fuller than I'd ever seen it. Not just our original group of 7, but dozens of families. Parents who'd kept quiet for years, parents who'd moved their kids to different schools rather than fight, parents who'd believed their children were careless with money until they'd seen our documentation. The meeting was held in the cafeteria. Brennan sat at the front table with the principal and 2 school board members who'd been hastily summoned. His designer suit looked less impressive when faced with a room full of working parents who'd sacrificed to replace stolen lunch money. I presented our evidence calmly. No accusations, no drama, just facts, dates, amounts, patterns. The school board members grew increasingly uncomfortable as the scope became clear. This wasn't about a few missing dollars. This was about years of systematic theft from the most vulnerable families. Other parents stood up to share their stories. Maria talked about her daughter's panic attacks. James described his son's Buckeye. Patricia revealed how her family had survived on ramen for a week to replace stolen money. Story after story of children blamed, parents dismissed, families struggling in silence. Brennan tried to respond, to explain, to deflect, but his words fell flat. The evidence was overwhelming. The community had finally found its voice, and that voice was saying enough. The school board members huddled in whispered conference. The principal's face had gone pale. Brennan's confident smile had long since faded. The room waited in tense silence. Finally, the board president stood. She announced that Brennan would be placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. His classroom would be monitored. All grades would be reviewed. Any families who had documented losses could submit claims for reimbursement. But more importantly, she apologized. To the children who hadn't been believed. To the parents who'd been dismissed. To the families who'd suffered in silence. It wasn't enough. Could never be enough. But it was acknowledgement. It was a start. As the meeting ended, something beautiful happened. Kids who'd been keeping their distance from Tommy started approaching him, apologizing, admitting they'd known something was wrong but hadn't known what to do. The fake security camera sticker was peeled off his desk. The whispers in the hallway stopped. Brennan left the building carrying a cardboard box. His Tesla no longer a symbol of success, but of shame. Parents watched from the parking lot, not celebrating but witnessing. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. About ensuring no other child would go hungry while their teacher counted stolen lunch money. Over the following days, the truth continued to emerge. Brennan's wife quietly discontinued her tutoring services. The principal announced new policies for classroom monitoring and financial transparency. The district implemented mandatory training on recognizing and reporting suspicious behavior. Tommy returned to school on Monday walking taller than he had in months. His classmates greeted him differently, not as a thief, but as someone who'd stood up to injustice. He ate lunch in the cafeteria for the first time since the accusations began, surrounded by kids who finally understood what he'd endured. Our parent group continued meeting, but now in the open. We created a support network for families facing similar situations. We shared resources for recognizing financial abuse in schools. We made sure no family would face this alone again. The money Brennan had stolen was gradually returned through the district's emergency fund. It wasn't much to some, but to families like ours, it meant groceries, gas, dignity. It meant our children could participate in school activities without shame. I kept working my shifts at the diner, but something had changed. Customers who'd heard about our story left bigger tips. My manager adjusted my schedule so I could attend school board meetings. The community that had seemed indifferent had simply been unaware. Tommy started raising his hand in class again. He tried out for the science fair team and made it. He helped other kids create their own documentation systems, teaching them to protect themselves and each other. He learned that speaking truth to power was possible, even for a 12-year-old kid from a poor family. The other families began healing too. Maria's daughter started sleeping through the night. James's son returned to his confident self. Patricia's family shared a real meal together for the first time in weeks. Small victories that meant everything. Mrs. Chen sent me a card. Inside, she'd written simply that she was proud of us for doing what she couldn't, for refusing to be silenced, for protecting the next generation of vulnerable kids. As the school year ended, I thought about how differently it had concluded than I'd imagined during those dark weeks. We hadn't needed lawyers or reporters or viral fame. We needed each other. We needed courage. We needed the simple power of truth told collectively. Tommy and I still struggled financially. I still taped my shoes and watered down dish soap. But we'd learned something valuable. That poverty wasn't shameful. That being vulnerable didn't mean being powerless. That sometimes the smallest voices, when raised together, could topple the tallest giants. The last day of school, Tommy cleaned out his locker with a smile. No more hidden money. No more false accusations. No more fear. Just a kid looking forward to summer, knowing he'd return in the fall to a safer place. A place where lunch money was just lunch money, not a weapon used against the poor. That evening, I watched Tommy play basketball with neighborhood kids, his laughter carrying across the courtyard. He'd survived. We'd survived. And in surviving, we'd change things. Not dramatically, not completely, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to make a difference. Enough to ensure no other child would endure what he had. The document we'd created became a template for other parent groups. The videos the kids had made inspired others to speak up. The network we'd built grew stronger. Change happened slowly, imperfectly, but it happened. One family, one school, one community at a time. Thanks for coming along while I tried to make sense of it all. Definitely one of those stories that gets your brain spinning. Like the video, it helps more than you think.